They're cute.
They're fluffy.
They're furry beyond the realms of legal.
It's the fur babies.
Thank you very much for participating. I greatly appreciate it. Ooh! Boop! Hi, and welcome, and big warm welcome if you're new. Today's another book video. The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. It was also made into a movie by Martin Scorsese, of all people, and I love Martin Scorsese, so I'm not entirely sure why this one passed me by. I'd never heard of this up until now. So the book takes place in 1930s Paris, where 12-year-old Hugo Cabret lives on his own in the Paris train station. So he lost his dad, who used to be a clockmaker and also work on mechanical objects, automatons, for the museum. He then went to live with his uncle, who looked after all the clocks in the Paris station, until one night his uncle never came home and Hugo found himself on his own looking after the clocks. While his father was alive, he was working on this rather strange automaton that was left in the museum, and his dad was trying to fix it. So it's an automaton of a man sitting at a desk, and he has this clockwork mechanism that presumably makes him write something, and Hugo managed to get to salvage this automaton from the wreckage of the museum and brought it home with him to the station to try and fix it, because he, in his 12-year-old brain, is convinced that whatever message this automaton is going to write will be the answer to all his problems. So his dad taught him clockwork, so he has all the skills needed to repair this machine. But in order to get the parts, he goes to steal them from a toy shop in the station held by a grumpy old sod. Said grumpy old sod decides, instead of calling the police on Hugo, to actually give him a job so that he can have a salary and earn his own wage and not keep stealing. The old sod also seems to know about the automaton that Hugo's trying to repair, and so he finds this notebook that Hugo has with drawings of the automaton and tries to confiscate it. So this is something that's pretty triggering for him. And later on, Hugo finds out that the grumpy old sod is none other than French filmmaker Georges Méliès. So I was super happy to come across a book about Georges Méliès because I'm a huge fan. He is, as far as we know, the first movie maker to make a sci-fi movie back in 1902. So I want to start by talking about what I actually liked about this novel. Obviously, I was super happy to have a second grade level book all about the life and works of Georges Méliès. You've probably seen this picture of the moon with like a rocket stuck in its eye. That's from one of his movies. That's from the Trip to the Moon from 1902. It's an image that's still immensely referenced to this day, and I've seen it in all kinds of places. I've seen it in children's books, I've seen it in movies, I've seen it in music videos, and this is the most recent one that I found. This is a piece of art from Lackadaisy, and so, yeah, even 120 years later, this piece of art is still being referenced.
Again, as far as we know, the first sci-fi movie ever made where a group of astronomers decide to go on a trip to the moon. And in case you're wondering, this is what the moon landing looked like in 1902. The European Space Agency has come a long way since this happened, but I love this. It's so much fun. All of these movies are on YouTube if you want to go and see them. I'll link them in the description. This movie was also quite a novelty for its time because it was 15 minutes long, which was insane back then, and features quite a lot of special effects. And Georges Méliès was the pioneer of all these incredible effects that were like, this was the dawn of cinema. So it was just on a huge journey of discovery, what you could do with cinema, what kind of trickery you could use. And he was very big on sci-fi and fantasy and using automatons, of which he had quite a big collection. And it also presents a portion of his life that was real. He did actually end up working in a toy shop in the Paris station. So before World War One, he was incredibly popular. His movies, like obviously these new groundbreaking sci-fi fantasy movies with all these special effects in them, were super, super popular and everybody wanted them. Even in the USA, and every cinema wanted to show them. And this interestingly led to the first really big case of pirate copying. Because back then it was like movies were on one reel and they would travel from cinema to cinema to be shown. But obviously we're talking about somebody who lived in Paris, so this movie had to go all around France, maybe all around Europe, UK, whatever, and then travel to the USA. So pirate copying started happening on quite a big scale so that American cinemas could show these movies. But obviously that didn't go down very well with Georges Méliès and his team, and they went on like this crusade to try and get hold of as many of this pirate copies as possible. And he even found a way of like copyrighting his films by punching holes in them in a specific way. But interestingly, it was this mass of pirate copying that actually saved his work for future generations, because during World War One, like cinema reels, film reels, were confiscated or requisitioned and used to create uniforms, arms, whatever, to help with the war effort. And Georges Méliès wasn't excluded from this, so his films were confiscated and used to create the heels of boots for the soldiers in the army. So he went from being this internationally renowned filmmaker to just being this random dude in Paris who had his entire life's work just taken away from him to help with the war effort. His wife, at the time, who was an actress in a lot of his movies, passed away, and he ended up remarrying a lady who owned a toy store in the Paris train station, which is how he ended up selling toys and sweets to children in the station for a living. So in the novel, Hugo discovers who he is, along with Georges' goddaughter Isabelle, and they dig up from the from the Film Academy archives a bunch of his movies. So he ends up having his former glory restored. The other thing I really liked about this book is it's not like, there's a lot of illustrations, probably about half of it is illustrations, but this is like a storytelling method. So you go from like one image to the next, and there is no text about these sequences describing what they are. They just, here's a bunch of illustrations, and they tell a part of the story. And I actually really like that, because this book focuses so much on cinema, because obviously you've got the whole, this book's about Georges Méliès, one of the great pioneers of sci-fi and fantasy cinema. But Hugo is super passionate about movies, and his dad always took him to the cinema on his birthday, and there's a bunch of movie makers from the time who get mentioned, like Charlie Chaplin. Buster Keaton is mentioned quite a few times. I think he's the one who's mentioned the most in this book, apart from Georges Méliès. And again, if you haven't seen Buster Keaton's movies, you are seriously missing out. But getting back to the illustrations, I thought it was very fitting to have part of the book that was illustrated in what is basically a storyboard, which is also interesting because Georges Méliès, apart from special effects, also not pioneered because he didn't create it, but he normalized the use of storyboards when creating movies. So that was very fitting. Now let's talk about what I didn't like about this book. First of all, the character of Hugo. He is not a good character. So in the novel, it's rammed into the reader's brain that he's a thief. So he steals milk from the newsagent
at the train station and croissants because obviously he needs to eat and he needs milk, like he needs to live. And this is a point that comes up later on when he actually gets caught by the security guard at the station, and Georges Méliès and Isabelle come in and they're like, oh yeah, but it's okay if he steals because he's doing this to feed himself, like he's a 12-year-old boy. But like, it does beg a lot of questions, like what happened to his uncle's salary? Because later on in the novel we find out that his uncle was drunk one night and fell in the Seine and presumably drowned. But like, surely this man was paid for looking after the clocks in the station, and nobody was like, the clocks are still working properly, but we haven't seen the clock guy, and he's not come to collect his salary. What's going on? Like, Hugo's convinced that people only come and investigate if the clock stopped working, but presumably there's other people involved in Hugo's uncle's work. So that's a bit odd. Also, Georges Méliès gives him a job. So again, presumably he has a salary. So he wouldn't need to steal anymore to be able to live. Like, isn't that the point? So why is he still stealing food? And he doesn't only steal from like food to live, he also steals from Isabelle. It turns out Isabelle has the key to make the automaton work, which she herself stole from her godmother. And she also steals, when Georges Méliès confiscates Hugo's notebook with the illustrations in it, she goes and steals that from her godfather to give it back to Hugo. And this leads to Hugo getting fired because Georges believes that Hugo broke into his house somehow and got the book. And like, he goes home and Isabelle's like following him and she's been like, hey, I got your book back. Why aren't you thankful? Because you got me fired. That's why. He's not thankful at all. He's horrible to her in this moment. And like, it's okay for children to be like horrible in novels. I'm not saying that they're supposed to be great characters, but it would have been nice if he could, like, you know, apologize for what he said to her and being so mean. It also could have been nice if she could have apologized to, like, you know, take some kind of accountability for A, stealing from her godfather, and B, getting him fired. But she never does. Like never really. Like, there's a whole conversation about the fact that they stole, but, like, they never seem to regret it or take any accountability for it. There is an emotional void in this book, which I'll get to in a minute. But Hugo also finds out, because Isabelle's obsessed with Greek mythology, and he finds out about the story of Prometheus and how he stole fire from the gods so that humans could live, which leads to this whole reflection on his part of being like, oh, so Prometheus stole from the gods, which is bad, but he gave it to humans so that they could live independently and survive on their own. So that's a good thing. So, like, he did a bad thing for a good thing, for a good reason. But again, there's no... It could have been a massive conflictual point for him. Like, I am stealing from this lady, I'm stealing her milk that she worked hard and earned money to pay for, and technically I don't deserve it, it doesn't belong to me, whatever, but I'm gonna steal it anyway because I need it to live. So that could have been a massive conundrum for him, but it's just not. Like, he does not care. He's just like, I need the milk, I'm gonna take it, that's it. I need something, I'm gonna take it. And again, he steals stuff from Georges Méliès' store when he's working there, and Georges Méliès knows and just lets it go. Like, at no point does he have to ever face the consequences of his actions, apart from the 5 minutes that he spends locked in a cage in the station. But that doesn't come to anything because Georges Méliès just sachets in. He's like, oh no, just let him go, it's fine. Sure. So yeah, Hugo, not a very nice character, and doesn't have any real character development to speak of. It could have been like this emotional journey with all of these like conflicting notions going on, but it's not. Isabelle's also such a brat. Like, oh my god. So, and the other thing I really didn't like, as I said, this book is completely devoid of emotion. Hugo is an empty husk of a character. He doesn't feel anything. And he should, because, you know, his dad died. And we're told that he's sad about that. But that's it. Like, there's a scene where they go to the cinema and they, like, sneak in because they don't have the money to pay for it. And he kind of reminisces about, oh, how my dad used to take me to the cinema and it was great and blah, and living in a dream world that is on the silver screen. But, like, it's only, like, surface level. Like, how does it feel? What is he going through? What is he feeling at this moment? To, like, it could have been like, oh, he would like react the way he would have done with his dad at the cinema. Like, I don't know, he could have, maybe he looked up at him or held his hand, or there was like some subtle communication between them, and now he automatically does this because this is what he always did, and then realizes that his dad is not there for that. And the soul-crushing emotions that lead to that, the grief of, here's a wonderful thing that I love, and he loved it, and that is so deeply connected with his dad, so he can still have the experience of the cinema, but not with his dad anymore. So it's still meaningful to him, but not in the same way, because there's something missing that he's never going to get back. But yeah, no, we don't get any of that. And then there's Georges Méliès, and as I said, his movies were confiscated during World War I, which must have been just such a horrendous experience to go through. So in the book, two people from the Film Academy come to see him, and they're like, oh, we're big fans of your movie, we want to talk to you. And he is like, oh yeah, well, this was hard for me, you know, losing my movies, so I became an old sod, like every single old sod in every children's book anywhere ever. Please can we stop with the old sod who went through something horrendous and just locked up all their emotions to become said old sod? Can we just move on? Can we just get rid of that trope? And it's been done. Let's find something else. So he has this scene, this monologue where he explains what it was like, but again, it is very, very surface level stuff. And the only thing that I took from it was there's a scene where Hugo's in the shop and he can hear his boots like making a sound on the floor, and he tells him to like stop doing that because it annoys him. And he says that he has to like sit in the toy shop in the station all day and hearing people's shoes as they walk on the ground, hearing the very thing that his movies were made into, and how soul-crushing that is. So, and that's the only thing I really took from it, about how just every day hearing the reminder of, well, shoes are more important than movies, and your life work didn't actually matter that much because boots. That's it. Like, and again, it could have been made into something so much more. Like, this is the devastating effect that war can have. It's not just about the soldiers that are dying on the front. It's also about those who, like, the ripple effect that war has on the population, even among people who aren't necessarily involved, but how it can destroy a person's life work. And this is why I say that Georges Méliès made the first sci-fi movie as far as we know, because there might be others. It might be someone else who also had their films confiscated during World War I, but who didn't have any pirate copies to show to the world later, and who was forgotten about, and who never made a thing of, oh yeah, I used to be a movie maker and I used to do this. So they were just forgotten. So history's just forgotten them because the war happened and so much gets destroyed in the war. And today we know how important these films are, how important it is to preserve them and to show them. We never get a sense of how it felt to him to have his entire life's work just taken away, and there was nothing that he could do about it. Everything that he'd loved, everything that he had poured his heart and soul into making, just gone, never to be retrieved and turned into boots. And how did that feel for him? You know, what did he go through? Did he, you know, keep a stiff upper lip when it was going on? what happened? Did he break down? Did he cry? Did he go into depression? I mean, obviously we know that he turned into a grumpy old sod, but is that it? Like, surely. So a lot of missed opportunities when it came to emotions in the characters. So that was a shame. So I'm kind of 50-50 about this book. On one hand, I really like the way it was told. I really like the fact that it's about Georges Méliès and introducing Georges Méliès to a younger audience, because everybody should see his movies. Everybody should know that the extraordinary movies we have today with all this CGI and special effects and camera angles and jiggery pokery and all of that, this is where it came from. This is how it was created. And it is interesting now because I feel like that is happening. The industry is looking back on the firsts in cinema. Like I mentioned the film, like Margot Robbie's film Babylon, which I haven't seen yet. I really should, because that's about sound first being used in cinema and all the issues that they went through. Now that they had this new element that needed to be integrated into movies. So obviously the fangirl in me went completely crazy for that. And the storyboarding method of storytelling, which is apparently something Brian Selznick does a lot. Like that's his like specific mode of storytelling. So I want to talk about automatons for a second because I'm a nerd. And so Georges Méliès did have a big collection of automatons, and he used to use them in his movies. And in the late 1800s or middle to late 1800s, automatons were huge. And it's sad because a lot of them don't work anymore and a lot of them have been lost, and including all the ones that were created by Georges Méliès. They were donated to a museum, so again, that part of the book is true. But they were just left to rot, and nobody understood the significance of them, so they've all been lost and none of them work anymore, and it's a tragedy. And this specific automaton in this book is actually based on a real one. It wasn't made by Georges Méliès, but the automaton in the book does, like when Hugo manages to get it to work, it draws a picture and signs Georges Méliès, and that's how they figure out who he is. And so this one's based on an automaton by Maillardet, which actually could draw pictures, and nobody knew actually who made it until they got it working again, and it drew, I think it could draw like 6 pictures and several poems, so it's quite a elaborate automaton, but they didn't know who built it, and it actually signed Maillardet. So that part was also real, that also happened, and that's how they figured out who made it, because it actually signed in its name. That should have been a lesson to like everybody who made automatons back in the day. It's like, get it to write something and sign it with your name so that people will know that you built it. If you ever get a chance to go to Barnard Castle in the UK, there is an automaton there, the Silver Swan automaton. It was actually made in the 1700s. It's super old and it's so beautiful. It's this swan, like it goes through all this routine. The swan kind of tilts its head and I think it like cleans its feathers, and then there's like little fish move. It's like on a river and there's little fish moving in water, like in automaton water, and the swan reaches down and catches one of them. It is mind-blowing. It's so gorgeous. I'd love to go and see it one day. I've never actually seen it for real. But yeah, that's one of my goals in life, to go and see the Silver Swan automaton. So yeah, I have mixed feelings about this book. Like on one hand, it was really nice to read about Georges Méliès and have a book that is presenting his work to younger generations, and also a movie which I need to watch now. I need to watch Babylon and Hugo Cabret by Martin Scorsese. But yeah, the sad thing is a lot of missed opportunities, especially with the emotional side of the storytelling, very much left to be desired. So that was The Invention of Hugo Cabret by Brian Selznick. As always, thank you all very much for watching. Please tell me what you thought in the comments. Love, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.